director of Stockton International Riverside Festival, but I actually stood down as artistic director in 2012, which was the 25th edition of the festival. I thought 25 was quite enough, so I stopped. And I've worked for the last 3 years as a mentor, as the associate artistic director of the new director. The other thing which is even more important to say is that what I'm about to talk about is mainly around the social impact of the festival, but I'm absolutely not an expert. And thank you, Alan, for suggesting that I might be. But, my background was as a festival director and programmer, and yeah. But it's an interesting theme, and you will later on in the presentation get some charts and information because we've participated for the last 2 years, and I've been quite closely involved with a survey of outdoor arts festivals in the whole UK, which an organisation called the Audience Agency has been conducting. Audience Agency is funded by Arts Council England, basically to do everybody's arts marketing. And they came quite naively to outdoor arts, but worked closely with people like myself and the independent Outdoor Arts Network to gain some insights into what the sector is about. They've actually surveyed over the last 2 years 35 festivals and events, outdoor events in the UK. So the information is quite interesting, and how it relates to Stockton is interesting. Okay, I call this Stockton International Riverside Festival Understanding a Success Story, because in contrast to what Alan was just talking about, having a plan and an understanding, we stumbled into success. I stumbled into success with the event, and it's taken quite a while to understand, and I'm still understanding, why the event was actually the success that it was. This is just by way of the kind of event that we've been presenting very successfully to very large audiences in Stockton for a number of years, well, over 20 years. So, Stockton-on-Tees, it's up there. It's a long way from London. It's in the northeast of England. In the context of some of the towns which have been described in this festival, including here, I guess Stockton's almost a metropolis. It has a population of about 70,000. So it is a small town, and it's a town which is taken over by the festival, but it's not as small as some. And Stockton, yeah. I started the festival when I was running the art centre in the town. I've been running the art centre for about 18 months, and I realised that in the summer months we didn't do anything. That's quite normal with cultural centres and theatres in the UK. We all have a few months off and go to Edinburgh and see shows and come back and start in the autumn season. I wasn't quite satisfied with that, so I decided to make something happen in the summer months and put on a series of events around a circus, an outdoor, in a big top, in a centre part of town, non-animal circus, but I didn't know anything about circus or really not a great deal about the other events I was putting on. I was very much indoor focused. And somewhat to my surprise, it was a weekend event, and the reaction of the public was amazingly positive. To the extent that the next year we thought, okay, we'll try this again and we'll call it a festival, and we just celebrated our 28th edition. So at the time, I didn't reflect very much on why it had been as successful as it was. I was obviously very pleased, and actually became a kind of a moment of change in my professional career, because in the art centre I was working hard to attract an audience of 100 people to a performance, and moving to the outdoors. One of our events in that very first festival was attended by approximately 4,000 people, and I thought, okay, we're making a connection here with people that the indoor work, for whatever reason, physically can't achieve and actually isn't achieving anyway. So, as I say, I didn't reflect a lot on the reasons for this success, partly because, like all of us working in the arts, we're always project-driven and on to the next project. I had my autumn season to think about. Partly also because I actually come from the northeast. I was brought up only about 20 kilometres from Stockton. I knew the town as a child, and I thought, well, I know these people. What is there to understand? This is a picture of the Stockton to Darlington Railroad, which is the first passenger railroad in the world. Very important part of the Industrial Revolution, and very important part in the growth of capitalism, because, of course, moving more than people, moving raw materials and manufactured goods by railways is what made the modern world. The Stockton to Darlington Railroad was the first passenger railroad, but it was actually started to move coal from the East Durham coal field to Stockton, where it was exported to London and everywhere else. This picture is very unrepresentative, actually, because the people standing in precariously balanced in the coal wagons there, in their Sunday best, their stovepipe hats and their bonnets, are not the typical people of Stockton, or probably Darlington at that time. They're the local bourgeoisie having a day out. Stockton is what the Americans would call a blue-collar town. It's a very working-class town, and it was had a very important role to play, actually, in the Industrial Revolution, because of the combination of coal field, shipbuilding, iron and steel. There are also iron deposits quite close by. So for the size of the town, it generated a disproportionate amount of the country's wealth for over 100 years. But there's very little to see of that in the kind of physical infrastructure of Stockton, because whereas in a lot of northern and Midland towns in England, the kind of civic pride of the local merchants and bourgeoisie is reflected in fine buildings. Actually, most of the coalfield and most of Stockton was owned by a member of the aristocracy, Lord Londonderry, and he lived in London and he took all of his wealth away. So there's very little physical evidence of the impact of the Industrial Revolution. And that building there, which is a kind of regular feature of publicity in Stockton, is the town hall, which is actually Georgian. It's pre-Industrial Revolution. It's still in use, actually, as the town hall, which is quite nice. So, this is a typical image of Stockton for 150 years, really. This is towards the end of the kind of industrialization of the town. That's actually the petrochemical works, Imperial Chemical Industries, as you can see, right next door to the social housing. Stockton, people in Stockton, as I say, were working class and very poor. And in fact, in the 1930s, 100 years after the Stockton Railroad, the health officer in Stockton, a man called George McGonigal, did some pioneering studies. You wouldn't think it was necessary in the 1930s, of why people who had been moved from slum housing into slightly better housing with plumbing were still, levels of mortality were extremely, they didn't live very long. And the simple reason was it was the 1930s, it was the Great Depression, and people were starving to death. Over 50% of the population of Stockton in the 1930s was unemployed. Nowadays, certainly in England, we're apt to look at things like ill health among low-income families as it's partly their own fault because they're eating so much junk food. They're eating the wrong things, drinking the wrong things. Actually, in the 1930s, there was no fast food, there was no junk food. They just didn't have enough to eat. The housewives at that time were very good plain cooks, but they didn't have enough to eat. So McGonigal's research in Stockton, he published 3 papers while he was there. He died himself of tuberculosis in 1939. Were very instrumental in setting up the National Health Service immediately after the war. So, but as you can see, life continued to be a very much blue-collar town this is a picture from the 1960s. And still, Stockton was a town for real working men. This changed around about the time I came on the scene, along with this lady. I think you all know who she is, Margaret Thatcher. And Margaret Thatcher, she had a vision for the British economy where manufacturing, which was arguably on the way out, could be replaced by a service economy. We're still trying to work out what that means, because we understand people working in shops have jobs, but who is creating the wealth? And apparently it was the banks, invisible earnings. And we all know what happened to that recently as well. But anyway, Margaret Thatcher kind of delivered the coup de grace to a lot of, she closed the coal fields, and a lot of the remaining industry in the northeast came to an end in the 1980s. Where she is there is actually, it used to be shipbuilding, and latterly that it was part of the offshore industry. It was, constructing oil rigs. That closed in the 1980s as well. And having destroyed, Margaret decided that it was time to rebuild. So she made what was called at the time her walk in the wilderness. This is Stockton, and promised to transform this heavily polluted, devastated landscape into something new. And what she had in mind was building call centres and care homes and so on, service economy. And indeed, it has been transformed, as you'll see from some of the images. She made that walk in 1987. I started to work in Stockton at the same time, and I started the festival in 1988. So conditions in 1988 were not hugely difficult to what they'd been in the 1930s. In some parts of Stockton, unemployment was a mere 30%. Yeah, well, just pause. So this was the point when I started the festival, and as I say, it was enormously successful. And I wasn't entirely sure why at the time, and didn't trouble to ask. Some of the early manifestations of why the festival was so successful is that I did always conceive it as a festival for local people. Stockton is not a tourist town. Tourism is not really a driver. The council in recent years has actually spent quite a lot of money prettifying the centre of the town, and particularly the riverside, and they would like to have more tourists, but it's not a tourist town. Throughout the whole trajectory, the nearly 30 years of the festival's history, and we've been doing audience research for about 20 of those years, only about 12% of the total audience comes from outside the Tees Valley, the immediate vicinity of Stockton. So, and there actually aren't enough hospital beds to sustain a tourism industry anyway, so relatively few overnight visitors. People stay with family and friends, quite a bit of that, people coming back to the region because the festival's taking place. So it's always been a festival for local people, and that was one of the reasons that the Stockton Council, after 2 years, decided to work with me to develop the festival. And Stockton Council have, it's a Labour, old-fashioned Labour council with a paternalistic attitude to the people who live in the borough. The council basically has a mentality that it's their role to provide all of the people's needs from the cradle to the grave. I think you're familiar with this in Scandinavia. It's very much not the pattern across the whole of England. It's a completely different pattern in the south, where local government is frowned on, actually, and the important thing is to keep taxes as low as possible. But as I say, the northeast, because of its history, the council, after some initial skepticism, grasped that the festival was having an impact with local people, and they've been very good financial supporters ever since, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a while. The other interesting thing was there were very early signs of local people taking ownership of the event. The first festival was in 1988. In 1989, local musicians and actors formed a fringe. I had no part in its creation, but from year 2 of the festival's history, we had a fringe. The other thing which happened, which the council had a hand in, was to stage a community carnival, which is basically a big parade, an opportunity for people to work with local artists, dress up, and over 1,000 people take part in that event every year. So people took ownership very quickly. And something that Trevor was speaking about yesterday, Stockton became embedded, I would say, within 3-4 years in the life cycle of the city. It became the main cultural manifestation of the city, which obviously there were an art centre and a gallery, but the festival became the thing which people identified with in terms of local culture. And it became more than that, and that's really what some of this is going to examine. There was no similar gathering. I didn't reflect on this, but there was no similar gathering in Stockton. Stockton was a town which had no tradition of any other kind of civic activity or any other thing which brought the whole population together in public space to share that space. So actually, the festival fulfilled a need which I didn't recognize that I was going to be able to fulfill, and the council had never recognized that there was a need. So that really the festival became the annual gathering of people in the whole town, in the town centre. And the local authority has grasped this very much latterly in the last kind of 10, 15 years. Stockton, which was obviously an industrial town and then a post-industrial town, has now reinvented itself. The town has a 10-year development vision, and it is Stockton as a festival town. That's the whole ethos. That's how Stockton defines itself. That's how the local government defines itself, and that's how they want their local people to define what takes place there. So I'm going to move on to this survey now, and really this is the national survey conducted by the Audience Agency. As I say, 35 organisations, 17,000 responses. We're quite sure it is the largest audience research project into outdoor arts that's ever been undertaken anywhere. And there's another year coming next year, which will be interesting because, as I say, they were very naive in some of their assumptions when we began. So, this is actually from their, it's in their paper, but this is Stockton responding to street theatre. One of the performances from an event a couple of years ago. And you can see it's kind of densely packed. One of the things which really strikes visitors to the town, artists, especially artists from other countries, and professionals, is that, as I said earlier, the whole town is there. People who would not normally be associated, even in an outdoor festival, with being part of an outdoor festival audience, because frankly we have festivals which are very good outdoor festivals like Greenwich and Docklands in London, where the audience is rather middle class and a lot of students, and the real East End working class are not necessarily present. In Stockton, everyone is present, and over the years I got tired of people saying to me, gosh, how do you make a town how do you make a festival in such a town? What do you mean? Well, they're a little bit rough, aren't they? Yes, they are, but they're very interested in the festival. So, this is a kind of overall conclusion of the 2-year survey. What do outdoor festivals do? They attract a diverse audience, more representative of the population as a whole than any other type of arts festival. That should go without saying. And it includes, and in Stockton, in spades, it includes people who do not regularly engage in other types of arts activity. Interesting that there is a slide which I won't show, which shows the kind of things that people, the other kind of cultural activity that people do regularly engage in. This is low attenders. It's topped by cinema, but then things like visits to an exhibition or a museum. Going to live theatre is actually a little bit more popular than going to live music, which I was surprised by. And then things like contemporary dance, opera, ballet, way down the list. This next one is very important. It's a special social experience, as they say, at the heart of what people enjoy about outdoor arts. I think this is something which, I thought Trevor's presentation yesterday was great, but he didn't actually talk about the social aspect of why festivals in particular, opportunities for people to gather, why that's important in a town's life. Some things which could be related to the cultural audiences love the surprising and unexpected. They experiences rated highly. They actually want more information about what they've just seen, which is perhaps something we're deficient on in the outdoor sector. Strong associations with placemaking, the transformative effect is what the French writers about outdoor theatre call la trace, the kind of collective memory of the transformation of a space, particularly at night, which is why we like nighttime events so much and so. Okay, this is just something about age. As you can see, the figure on the left is the average attendance from outdoor arts. The figure on the right is the national average, and you can see that the groups which are most overrepresented are people from the age range 25 to 54. And Stockton kind of fits very well within that, slightly younger audience than the national average, which you can see from some of the photographs. And a very broad demographic. Another picture from the same survey. This is another event in Stockton. There was actually something going on in the shop window. They weren't waiting for the prices to change. This is fun. Alan could talk about this. This is, I'm sure you have the similar systems, This is this is a way of segmenting the audience and understanding what the audience's habits might be. It's a series of generalizations based on age and postcode. The top two don't apply to Stockton at all. Metroculturals and commuter land culture buffs. It's basically that's for large cities. The strong attenders in terms of Stockton, and a group which I think are very interesting and relevant to what we all do, are experience seekers. Then the kind of up our street Facebook families and trips and treats. But the experience seekers are very interesting because it's a phenomenon, rather like this lady. It's when you go to an outdoor event, there are almost more people pointing a camera at what's happening than there are watching what's happening. Then that's something which outdoor events and festivals actually share in common with things like rock concerts, other cultural activities. A whole group of people who are very interesting to marketeers because they tend to be young and upwardly mobile and have resources to spend, who are attracted to the kinds of experience that we create in an outdoor context. This again is a sort of national spectrum, showing which of these groups is overrepresented, and I've already indicated which of the Stockton ones which are overrepresented. Reasons for attendance. Again, it's interesting to reflect that one of the main reasons why people go to outdoor festivals is to be entertained, yes, and to spend time with friends and family. Again, this social aspect is very important to why people go, to enjoy the atmosphere, to be sitting out of the ordinary, etc., etc. But the social aspect is extremely important. And the nature of the outdoor arts experience: accessible, open, free, involving, low barriers to attendance, strong visual element to almost everything that you see, cross-cultural, not dependent on language, entertainment linked to a social experience, atmosphere, unexpected, interactive and participatory. And this is the kind of responses to a series of questions about how those 35 festivals and Stockton are rated in terms of what they do. And of course, the very pleasing thing, and I was quite suspicious. We've been doing audience research in Stockton for 20 years. It was actually a condition of a European Regional Development Fund grant, which was hilariously a tourism grant, and we had to measure how many tourists were coming to the festival. So we've been doing audience research for a long time, and I've got to be honest, personally I was quite resistant to the idea of audience research initially, because I thought somebody might use it to tell me what I should be programming rather than what I wanted to program. And actually audience research is a fantastic tool, because you almost always find that unless you're doing something very wrong, that the public on the whole massively appreciate and enjoy what it is you're trying to achieve. So you can see very high ratings for this. You can see the bottom, very good, good. The orange is neither, and the yellow and the far end is poor and very poor. So impressed with the organization, enjoying the experience. Quality of performances is over 90%. Value for money, well, 3 festivals should be a no-brainer. Ease of physical access in and around the festival, again scoring highly, but we do work with organizations like Attitude is Everything, which is a disability arts organization which gives advice on how to make even outdoor events, which you might assume were very accessible to people with disabilities, actually a better experience. And most of the complaints actually come down to the things we can't control, which is food and drink, shopping facilities, etc. But this thing about information about the performances is an interesting one. And community and social impacts. This is what people were asked whether they agreed or disagreed with these statements. The festival is good for the town's image. Massive agreement. The festival enhances a sense of community. Massive agreement. The festival encourages participation in community life and events. Strong agreement. The festival is welcoming to the whole community. Massive agreement. So these are as I say, the engagement with non-arts attenders and the social impacts of outdoor festivals clearly established in this report nationally, and Stockton is a very good exemplar because we have a greater diversity of socio-economic groups than anywhere else, actually, in the whole survey, represented in the festival audience. So, if you allow me, I'll just check my notes because I'm sure I missed a couple of things that I wanted to say. Yeah, okay. I think what I conclude from this is that we shouldn't lose sight, those of us that make outdoor festivals, with the fact that an outdoor festival should be a celebration. And that's actually a big reason why people come. It's a celebration of togetherness in one's own town or city. And of course, people will come in families, they will come in groups. That's another big finding, that, you know, unlike other patterns of arts attendance, people come in large groups of friends or large groups of friends and family. There are some dangers with that, and I find that local authorities are less aware of the dangers than they ought to be. Because the festival should be celebratory overall and should recognize that it attracts families, doesn't mean that we should only program celebratory activities and activities which are suitable for young children. Local authorities have a tendency to want to read that into their understanding of audience, and of course we wouldn't be creating a cultural experience if we were that limited. Conversely, Arts Council England, which is the second biggest funder of outdoor events in the UK, and we're very grateful for its support, arguably in an outdoor arts context across the board, but they put too much emphasis on innovation and experimentation. As the arts has become a more significant funder, as Arts Council has become a more significant funder of festivals like Stockton, we are encouraged very strongly to take risk. And I firmly believe, and that's what I said earlier, that an element of risk and innovation and taking people where they might not have known that they wanted to go is part of what we should be doing with any arts festival. But the Arts Council is overemphasizing risk, and it's important to strike a balance and not to lose sight of the celebratory aspect of the experience. Just finally, I did say, because I was asked, that I'd make some comment about economic impact. Well, again, Stockton's an extreme case. I was mentioning last night to a colleague that Stockton hasn't had a sponsor for about over 12 years, and for about the same period, we have not charged for any events at all. This is a decision of the local authority. We've had some experience of kind of presenting the festival as a mixed economy with some charging events. I think in the reality that the whole world faces at the moment, that kind of mixed economy, even in an outdoor context, is essential, and I don't think that Stockton will be able to sustain its desire not to charge. But anyway, they are interested, for the purposes of persuading their members, in the kind of economic data that Alan was talking about. And very briefly, the audience agency's national survey worked out, and they don't attach a huge amount of credibility to it, and I think all of these spend calculations come with a bit of a health warning. They worked out that the average spend per person attending an outdoor arts festival in the UK is between 26 and 28 pounds. Zero on that program, obviously. And in Stockton, it's actually somewhat lower. It's between 15 and 18, which is unsurprising, given what I've said about the makeup of the town. And what I'd like to do now, if the technology will allow, is just show two very short extracts of videos